You're just the janitor. You actually think you can beat me?
That's enough.
Step back.
The courtroom was already tense when Victor Hill leaned back in his chair and smiled. Not a nervous smile. Not the kind of smile a man gives when he's trying to hide fear. It was the smile of a billionaire who had spent 30 years getting people to move. When he spoke, every major decision in Hale Industries seemed to carry his fingerprints. Banks returned his calls. Politicians shook his hand. Executives twice his age stood when he entered a room. And now, sitting at the defense table, in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, Victor looked across the courtroom at the one person nobody expected to challenge him. Daniel Brooks, a blind janitor. Daniel stood quietly beside his attorney, wearing a clean but faded Navy maintenance uniform. His white cane rested against his leg, his shoes were worn. His hands were rough from years of work. He looked nothing like the people who usually walked into Victor Hill's world. Victor slowly glanced at Daniel's cane, then at his worn uniform, then back toward the judge. A few people in the gallery noticed the expression on his face. He was amused. Victor leaned toward his attorney and whispered something. The attorney tried not to smile. Then Victor spoke loudly enough for the entire courtroom to hear. "Your Honor, are we really going to pretend this man understands?" What he's talking about, the room became still. Daniel's attorney immediately stood objection. "That's insulting and irrelevant." The judge looked sharply at Victor. "Mr. Hale, you'll address the court with respect." Victor raised both hands, of course. "Your Honor." But his expression didn't change. He turned toward Daniel. "Mr. Brooks, you worked as a janitor in one of my buildings, correct?" Daniel nodded yes. "For how many years?" 11. Victor gave a small laugh. 11 years cleaning floors, emptying trash cans and fixing whatever my tenants broke." Daniel remained silent. Victor continued. "And now somehow you expect this court to believe that you know more about my company's internal operations than I do." Daniel's attorney stepped closer. "Daniel, you don't have to answer that." Daniel gently shook his head. "I'll answer." The room quieted again. Daniel turned his face toward Victor's voice. "No, Mr. Hale. I don't know more about your company than you do." Victor smiled for the first time. He looked satisfied. Then Daniel added, "But I may know more about what happened than you think I do." The smile disappeared for half a second. Victor recovered quickly. "That's an interesting statement." Daniel said nothing. Victor stood. His expensive shoes clicked against the polished courtroom floor. As he walked a few steps closer, "You know what I find fascinating?" Victor asked. Daniel waited. "People see a man in a uniform and assume he's harmless." Victor glanced at the gallery, but apparently sometimes they also assume he's a witness. A few people laughed. Daniel's attorney looked furious. Daniel didn't move. Victor pointed toward him. "You clean buildings, Mr. Brooks. You don't run corporations." Daniel quietly replied, "I never said I did." "Then why are you here?" Daniel's fingers tightened slightly around his cane. "Because someone has to tell the truth." That answer changed the atmosphere. The laughter stopped. Victor stared at him. Then he gave a slow, dismissive laugh. "The truth?" He looked toward the jury. "Your Honor, with all due respect, we're talking about a man who can't even see the evidence being presented." Several people exchanged uncomfortable glances. Daniel's face remained calm. Victor continued. He couldn't see who entered a room. He couldn't see what documents were signed. He couldn't see what happened that night. Daniel finally lifted his head. No, Victor smiled exactly. Daniel's voice stayed steady, but I could hear the courtroom went silent. Victor's smile faded slightly. Daniel continued. I could hear footsteps, voices, doors opening, elevators moving, people whispering when they thought nobody was listening. He paused, and sometimes, Mr. Hale, people reveal much more. When they think the person standing beside doesn't matter, nobody laughed. Now Victor stared at him for the first time that morning. The billionaire didn't look amused. He looked curious, but curiosity quickly turned back into confidence. He straightened his jacket and walked toward the defense table. Then let's find out just how much you really heard. Daniel remained still. Victor stopped a few feet away. His voice became colder, because if you're going to challenge me in my own courtroom, Mr. Brooks, he leaned forward slightly, You'd better be ready for what happens when you're wrong. Daniel's expression didn't change. He simply turned his face toward the judge. I am ready, Victor returned to his seat. But as he sat down, something had changed. The courtroom had entered, expecting to watch a billionaire defeat a janitor. Now, for the first time, people were beginning to wonder whether they had underestimated the wrong man. Victor Hale stood slowly from his chair. The courtroom was still carrying the tension created by Daniel's last words. Nobody was whispering now. Even the people who had laughed at the blind janitor a few minutes earlier were watching him differently. Victor noticed it, and he hated it. He was accustomed to controlling a room. He knew how to make investors nervous with a single sentence and how to silence executives with a glance. But Daniel Brooks had done something no one in Victor's world usually dared to do. He had refused to be intimidated. Victor adjusted the cuff of his shirt and looked toward the judge. Your Honor, I think we've spent enough time pretending this is some kind of mystery. Daniel's attorney immediately objected. Your Honor, my client has answered the question. Victor turned toward him. I'm not speaking to you. The judge's expression hardened. You will address the court properly. Mr. Hale. Victor nodded, understood. But instead of sitting down, he looked toward Daniel. Mr. Brooks. You said you know what happened that night. Daniel nodded. I said, I know what I heard. Victor smiled. Then let's make this simple. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a fountain pen. He placed it on the table with deliberate precision. The small click echoed through the courtroom. I've spent billions building Hale Industries. Victor said thousands of employees depend on it. Hundreds of investors have trusted me with their money. And every person in this courtroom knows that I'm not here because I enjoy losing. Daniel said nothing. Victor took another step forward. So here's my question. He pointed toward Daniel. Do you honestly believe you can win this case? Daniel's attorney leaned toward him. Don't take the bait. Daniel calmly raised one hand. I'll answer. Victor's smile widened. Daniel faced the direction of Victor's voice. I believe the truth can win. Victor laughed, not quietly. Not politely, he laughed, as if Daniel had just told the funniest joke he'd heard all year. The truth. Victor looked toward the jury. That's beautiful, then. He turned back. Let's see how much the truth is worth. He paused. Win this case. The courtroom became still. Victor continued, and I'll give you my empire. A wave of shocked whispers moved through the gallery. His own attorney immediately turned toward him. Mr. Hale. Victor raised a hand. Let me finish. He looked toward Daniel. Every controlling share, every major property. Every company under Hale Industries. Daniel's attorney stared at Victor. You cannot be serious. Victor smiled. I've never been more serious. The judge leaned forward. Mr. Hale. This is a courtroom, not a business negotiation. Victor nodded. I understand. Your Honor, that's precisely why I'm making the offer here. His confidence was almost unsettling. He believed Daniel had no chance. That was the important part. Victor wasn't making the wager because he thought Daniel might win. He was making it because he was absolutely certain Daniel would lose. Daniel's attorney whispered urgently, This is a trap. You don't need to accept anything. Daniel remained silent. Victor watched him carefully. What's wrong, Mr. Brooks? Daniel slowly turned toward him. Nothing, then, except. Daniel's fingers moved across the handle of his cane. The courtroom waited. Victor leaned forward. You've spent 11 years cleaning my buildings. Imagine what it would feel like to own them. A few people shifted uncomfortably. Victor's voice became almost mocking. You could finally stop taking orders from people like me. Daniel's face remained calm. Is that what you think I want? Victor frowned. What else would you want? Daniel took a breath. Justice. The answer landed harder than anyone expected. Victor's expression tightened. Daniel continued, Your money doesn't interest me. Victor looked genuinely surprised. Then why are you still standing here? Daniel turned slightly toward the judge. Because people who have money sometimes believe they can buy the truth. The courtroom fell completely silent. Daniel continued, They forget that the truth doesn't belong to the richest person. Victor stared at him for a moment. Nobody moved. Then Victor slowly smiled again. Fine. He turned toward his attorney. Put the offer on the record. The attorney hesitated. Victor put it on the record. The attorney reluctantly nodded. The judge asked for clarification. Victor stated the terms clearly. If Daniel Brooks won the case, Victor would surrender his controlling interest in Hale Industries and the assets attached to it, subject to the court's legal authority and the required transfer process. If Daniel lost, the wager would disappear. Victor returned to his seat. He looked satisfied. He believed he had just humiliated Daniel one more time. But Daniel wasn't thinking about the money. He was thinking about something he had heard 11 years earlier in a quiet hallway after midnight. A voice, a door, and a sentence. Victor Hale had probably forgotten the moment he said it. Daniel slowly turned toward his attorney, asked them to bring the maintenance logs. His attorney looked confused. Why? Daniel lowered his voice. Because the first lie is already in those records. The attorney stared at him. Across the courtroom, Victor's smile began to fade. For the first time, the billionaire wondered what exactly the blind janitor had been remembering all these years. The courtroom clerk returned with a thick stack of maintenance logs. Victor barely looked up. He was already smiling again. To him, this was exactly what he wanted. Let the janitor talk. Let him point to old paperwork. Let him pretend 11 years of cleaning buildings had somehow made him smarter than a team of attorneys. Victor leaned toward his lead attorney. Finish this, the attorney nodded and stood. Your Honor, the defense has already established that Mr. Hale was not present at the building during the time in question. These maintenance records are irrelevant to the central issue. Daniel's attorney opened the first log. Then let's establish exactly why they're relevant. The judge nodded. Proceed. Daniel sat quietly beside his attorney, his cane resting across his knees. The attorney began. This entry says, the east elevator was taken offline at 7:52 p.m. Daniel shook his head no. The attorney stopped. Victor looked irritated. What? Daniel turned toward the sound of his voice. That elevator wasn't offline at 7:52. Victor's attorney laughed. Mr. Brooks, the record is right there. Daniel calmly replied, the record is wrong. The courtroom stirred. Victor leaned back. Of course it is. His tone was dripping with sarcasm. The judge raised a hand. Let him explain. Daniel's attorney placed the log on the table. Daniel, how do you know? Daniel took a breath. Because I was the person who received the maintenance call. The attorney looked at him. You remember the exact time? I remember the voice. Whose voice? Daniel paused. Martin Cole. Victor's expression changed only slightly. But Daniel's attorney noticed. Who's Martin Cole? The attorney asked. Victor's lawyer immediately stood. Objection, speculation. The judge looked toward Daniel. Can you establish how you know this person? Daniel nodded. He was the night security supervisor. Victor's fingers slowly tightened around the edge of the table. Daniel continued. He called me at 8:31 p.m. His attorney looked at the maintenance log. But the official record says the elevator issue was reported at 7:52. Yes, so which is correct? Daniel answered without hesitation. Neither a murmur spread through the courtroom. Victor finally leaned forward. That's enough. The judge turned toward him. Mr. Hale, you will have your opportunity. Victor sat back, but the confidence in his face was beginning to crack. Daniel's attorney asked what happened at 8:31. Daniel closed his eyes. I heard the elevator moving. Moving, yes. Even though the records say it was offline, yes. How do you know it was the east elevator? Daniel's answer came softly. Because the east elevator made a different sound. Several people in the gallery looked confused. Daniel explained the motor had a damaged bearing. It made a clicking sound every time the elevator moved upward. His attorney looked toward the jury. And you remember that sound from 11 years ago? Daniel nodded. I remember sounds the way other people remember faces. That sentence changed the room. The people who had laughed at him earlier were now listening carefully. Daniel continued. That night I heard the elevator go up. His attorney asked what time. 8:47. Victor's attorney immediately stood. Your Honor, this is absurd. Daniel's attorney turned toward him. Then let's check the building's elevator system. The judge nodded. Do it. A technician was called forward. Minutes later, the courtroom watched as the system records were displayed. There it was, 8:47 p.m. East. Elevator activated. Victor's attorney stared at the screen. Victor didn't move. His billionaire confidence had disappeared. Daniel's attorney looked toward him. Mr. Brooks, did you hear anyone enter that elevator? Daniel nodded. One person. Can you identify him? Daniel remained silent for a moment. Then he said, "I didn't see him." Victor suddenly looked up. Daniel continued, but I heard him speak. The courtroom became completely silent. The attorney asked, "What did he say?" Daniel's voice lowered. He said, "Nobody is supposed to know I'm here." A gasp came from the gallery. Victor's face went pale. His attorney turned toward him. Victor whispered, "That isn't possible." Daniel slowly turned toward Victor's voice. "You said that sentence 11 years ago." Nobody moved. Victor stared at the blind janitor as if he were seeing him for the first time. Daniel wasn't smiling. He wasn't celebrating. He simply sat there calm and steady because he had never come into that courtroom looking for revenge. He had come looking for accountability, and that distinction matters because sometimes the person society ignores is the person who has spent the longest time watching, listening, remembering, and waiting for the right moment to speak. Victor had mistaken Daniel's silence for weakness. He had mistaken a work uniform for ignorance. He had mistaken blindness for inability. And now the entire courtroom was beginning to understand something Victor had refused to consider. A person's worth is never measured by their job title, their bank account, their appearance, or what the world assumes they cannot do. The judge looked down at the evidence. "Mr. Hale, we will continue this hearing tomorrow morning." The gavel struck, but nobody in the courtroom seemed ready to leave. Victor remained frozen in his chair. Daniel stood carefully, reached for his cane, and turned toward the exit. His attorney followed Daniel. He whispered, "How much more do you remember?" Daniel stopped for the first time. A faint smile appeared on his face. "Enough," he continued walking, and somewhere behind him the billionaire, who had promised to give away his empire if a blind janitor could win his case, finally understood the danger of underestimating someone simply because they looked powerless, because dignity doesn't need $1 billion bank account. Courage doesn't require perfect eyesight. And justice doesn't care who has the most money. If this story made you stop and think, tell me in the comments, was Victor's biggest mistake his arrogance? Or was it underestimating Daniel because he was blind and worked as a janitor? And if you were in Daniel's position, would you take the billionaire's empire after winning? Or would you use that power to expose everything he had hidden? I want to hear your answer, because the most powerful part of a story like this isn't simply watching someone powerful fall. It's reminding ourselves that the people we overlook may be carrying strength, knowledge, and courage we never bothered to see. And if you want the next story to feature another powerful person who makes the mistake of humiliating the wrong, ordinary worker, let me know in the comments what kind of setting you want next. A courtroom, a hospital, an airport, or a corporate boardroom.